I got married on June 16th, 1962, and like all girls of my generation, I was excited to start a family, my very own family. But as 2 years passed, I wondered if that would come to be. And I went to my doctor, and he told me that there was a doctor in Manhattan who was trying fertilization efforts, I guess you'd say, because I don't think it was even a science back then. There were no fertilization clinics and no fancy things and literature and all. So I went alone, and I was scared. And it was like something out of a movie, a very sparse room, a cold steel table, and a light bulb I'll never forget that swung on a wire above me. I was a young Catholic girl, and I just wasn't ready for the examination that hurt, and in places that was so private. I left in tears, and I started walking in Manhattan, and I was thinking about adoption as an alternative and walking, and all of a sudden I looked around and it was dark, and I was on the docks of Manhattan, and I was all alone, and this man was running towards me saying, "Stop, wait for me." And I thought, all right, there's no place to go. So I waited for him, and he was so tough looking and tough, but he was so nice. And he said to me, "I know you're upset and I know you're crying, but you shouldn't be here all by yourself. Where are you going? And I'll take you to the train station." And I followed him, and I just trusted in him. And talk about angels watching over you. This man certainly did. And so 2 years later, in early 1967, I welcomed Tommy, my first son. I adopted him from Angel Guardian Home for Unwed Mothers in Brooklyn, New York. And he was the most beautiful baby ever. When I saw him, my heart just burst. Before I went in, the nun that was my caseworker told me that if for any reason I didn't feel the baby they were showing me was right for me, that it was okay, just tell them I'd still stay in the same top place on the waiting list, and I'd wait for the next baby. But I just believed that God had a plan for me, and the plan was my son's. At the time, only one son. It was just a thrill to take him home. He had the most beautiful blue eyes. And to this day, he's been the joy of my life. 2 years later, I welcomed Bobby. He arrived on November 18th, 1968, and he was born also in October, on October 12th, 1968. Bobby came from Miami, Florida, and Angel Guardian worked with Catholic Charities in Florida to bring him to me. A caseworker flew him up, and in between her flights, I was handed this wonderful little baby boy with lots of curls, lots and lots of curls. He had drank all his bottles on the plane, and she had no more formula left for me. The stores on a Sunday were closed at that time, and I had to wait till I got home to feed the poor baby. And I thought, what a horrible way for Bobby to come into my home. But he and I developed a very special relationship. And every time I went over his crib or I leaned over his crib to talk to him, he would light up in a big, big smile and give me all these baby giggles that are so adorable. 3 years later, I found myself on a plane flying to Memphis to pick up Michael. Michael was born on June 20th, 1971, and I picked him up on August 25th, 1971. Ironically, 32 years later, my triplet grandchildren would be born on August 25th. Michael also had blue eyes, and he was just the cutest baby. Flying him home on the plane was a treasure in those days. The stewardess, we didn't call them flight attendants then, came and asked me about Michael, if I had visited parents, etc. And I said, no, I just adopted him. And she was so excited, and she told the entire plane that we had this special passenger on board, and he might cry and he might fuss, but please don't be too upset. And everybody was clapping and saying, yay, Michael, and it was a wonderful flight. There wasn't a peep out of him, because in those days you had hairdos up here and you had a curl that went down here. And the whole plane ride, Michael hung onto my curl, and my head was bent forever. It was and the formula. Because of what happened with the formula with Bobby, where there was no food, I brought Michael's food over on the plane when I got there in my luggage. St. Peter's Orphanage in Memphis gave me 2 cases of formula to take home, and I didn't want to hurt their feelings and say I already had formula, so I packed it in my luggage too. They didn't check luggage in those days. And Michael came home with a ton of food and 2 brothers, Bobby and Tommy, walking up and down outside my home with their grandparents, waiting for their new little brother to come home. And my new family was getting almost complete. There was still room in my heart for more, but that's for another chapter.